Hey guys, settle here. Tonight we begin not with emperors or grand victories, but with something far quieter, far more repetitive, and far more revealing, the daily life of women in ancient Rome. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these slow, wandering journeys through history. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to imagine these stories drifting across different time zones, quietly filling rooms in the dark. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum, and let's ease into tonight's story together. You wake up. Not to silence, not to peace, but to a house that is already alive. Somewhere nearby, a servant is moving. A door opens. Clay cups shift against each other with a soft, hollow sound. Footsteps echo lightly against stone floors that never quite warm up. If you're wealthy, you don't get out of bed immediately. You lie there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the day arrive before you do. Your bed is soft, or at least softer than most in the city. Linen sheets, maybe wool blankets, depending on the season. The room is modestly decorated. Painted walls if your household can afford it. Small details meant to suggest comfort rather than extravagance. But comfort, in your world, is carefully controlled. Because no matter how rich your family is, no matter how large the house, your life is not entirely your own. If you're a respectable Roman woman, a matrona, your role is already defined before your feet even touch the floor. Daughter. Wife. Mother. Preferably all three, efficiently. You sit up slowly. A servant may already be waiting. Not hovering, not staring, just present. Like a piece of furniture that occasionally hands you things. She brings water. Not hot. That would be too much to ask this early. Just enough to rinse your face, clear your thoughts. And begin the quiet process of becoming presentable. Because presentation matters. Not for yourself, necessarily. For your household. For your husband. For the idea of order that Roman society clings to like a well-folded garment. You wash your face, maybe your hands. Full bathing comes later, usually at the public baths, because even in wealth, privacy has limits. There are no long, indulgent morning routines here. No stretching by the window. No slow coffee. Just the steady, quiet understanding that the day has already begun, whether you feel ready or not. If you're not wealthy, the morning feels different. Faster. Colder. Less forgiving. You wake up not in a spacious room but in a cramped apartment, part of a towering insula, a Roman apartment building that leans slightly to one side and smells faintly of smoke, oil, and yesterday's cooking. Your bed is simpler. Straw-stuffed. Narrow. Shared space all around you. There's noise almost immediately. Voices through thin walls. Someone arguing. A child crying. A vendor shouting from the street below, already selling something you probably can't afford. There's no servant waiting for you. There's just the day. You sit up, adjust your clothes, and begin moving almost automatically. Because here, hesitation costs time. And time, for you, is work. Water has to be fetched. Food has to be prepared. Clothes have to be managed, repaired, reused. Every task is small, but they stack up quickly, like stones you carry without ever setting them down. And unlike the wealthy matrona, your life is not about maintaining an image. It's about keeping everything from falling apart. Back in the wealthier household, dressing begins. And this, more than anything, defines you. Clothing in Rome is not just fabric. It's identity. You start with a simple undergarment, a tunica. Light, practical, close to the skin. Over that, if you are married and respectable, comes the stola. Long layered. Draped carefully. It signals everything. That you are under the protection of a husband. That you are not to be approached casually. That you belong to a certain order in society that values appearance almost as much as behavior. There's also the palla, a shawl or cloak, draped over the shoulders when you leave the house. It adds modesty, but also a certain quiet authority. Dressing is not rushed. It's deliberate. Because every fold, every layer, every color sends a message. And in a society that watches constantly, messages matter. Jewelry may follow. Nothing excessive, unless your household is particularly wealthy. A bracelet. A ring. Maybe earrings. Gold, if possible. Because gold doesn't just decorate. It reassures. Hair takes time. More time than you'd like, probably. Roman hairstyles can be elaborate, especially for those with status. Braids, curls, pinned arrangements that require patience and, often, assistance. A servant works carefully behind you, arranging strands into something that looks effortless but absolutely isn't. You sit still. Because movement ruins everything. And because this is one of the few moments in the day where you are allowed to simply exist without performing a task. Even if someone else is technically doing the work. Makeup comes last. Light, but intentional. Powder to pale the skin. Pale skin suggests you don't work outside. That you are protected from the sun, from labor, from necessity. A hint of color on the lips or cheeks. Kohl around the eyes. Not too much. Just enough to suggest health, composure, and control. Because looking tired is not acceptable. Even if you are. Meanwhile, in the insula, dressing is quicker. Simpler. You wear a tunic too, but it's rougher. Less refined. Repaired in places where fabric has given up but necessity hasn't. There's no layered elegance here. Just practicality. Your hair is tied back. Quickly. Function over beauty. Jewelry, if any, is minimal. Maybe a simple piece you've had for years. Makeup is rare. Not because you don't want it. Because you don't have time for it. Or money. Breakfast arrives next. And like everything else, it depends on who you are. In a wealthy household, it's light but reliable. Bread. Maybe fruit. Cheese if available. Wine diluted with water, because drinking it straight would be considered excessive, even if everyone does it later anyway. You don't prepare it yourself. It's brought to you. You eat calmly. Slowly. Not because you're relaxed, but because there's no reason to rush this part. Meals are one of the few structured moments in the day. Predictable. Contained. In a poorer household, breakfast is less certain. Bread, if you have it. Leftovers, if there are any. Sometimes nothing. And if there is food, you eat quickly. Because the day doesn't wait. Work is already calling, even if it doesn't use words. And this is where your day truly begins. Not with a dramatic shift. Not with a clear purpose. But with a quiet, steady movement into responsibility. Because whether you are managing a household or struggling to keep one together, your entire day will be built on what needs to be done. Not what you want to do. After breakfast, the house begins to unfold around you. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just gradually, like a place remembering what it's supposed to be. If you are a matrona, this is where your role becomes visible. You don't go to war. You don't vote. You don't stand in the forum giving speeches about virtue and destiny. But you manage something just as constant, the household. And in Rome, the household is everything. It is reputation. It is structure. It is quiet proof that things are working the way they should. You move through the rooms slowly, not because you're in a hurry, but because you're expected to notice things. A servant carrying something incorrectly. A garment not folded the way you prefer. A storage jar left slightly open, which in this climate is less a mistake and more an invitation for something unpleasant to move in. You correct these things calmly. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Authority, in your position, isn't about raising your voice. It's about never needing to. You give instructions. Short. Clear. Repeated if necessary. Some servants listen immediately. Others, learn over time. And you remember all of them. Because managing people, even in silence, is part of your daily rhythm. Somewhere in the house, food is being prepared for later. Grain is being ground. Oil is being measured. Something is always being cleaned, repaired, or moved. And you oversee it all, even when it looks like you're doing very little. Because doing very little in a Roman household often means thinking about everything at once. Meanwhile, if you are not wealthy, your morning has already turned into work. There is no overseeing. There is only doing. You carry water from a public fountain, balancing the weight carefully because spilling it means repeating the entire trip. The streets are already active. Vendors shouting. Animals moving unpredictably. People brushing past each other with very little concern for personal space. You walk quickly. Not because you enjoy it. Because standing still in Rome is rarely comfortable. Back home, if it can be called that, tasks wait for you without patience. Grinding grain by hand. Preparing simple food. Sweeping out dust that returns almost immediately, as if the building itself refuses to stay clean. If you have children, they are already part of your routine. Not quietly. Never quietly. They need attention, food, correction, reassurance. And all of it happens at once, layered over everything else you're trying to finish. There's no separation between roles. You are not just one thing. You are everything, all the time. Back in the wealthier household, the late morning settles into something slower. More controlled. This is when you might sit. Not to rest, exactly. But to engage in the kind of activities that define your status. Spinning wool, for example. Not because the household desperately needs it. But because it signals virtue. Industry. Tradition. A Roman woman is expected to be productive, even when productivity is symbolic. So you sit, working with your hands in a way that looks effortless, practiced. There may be conversation. Other women in the household. Relatives visiting. Discussions that move between practical matters and quiet observations about other families, other marriages, other lives. Nothing too direct. Everything slightly filtered. Because even in private, words have weight. And they travel. If you are literate, and not all women are, you might read. Or have something read to you. Poetry, perhaps. Letters. Stories that reflect a world larger than your own, even if you rarely get to move freely within it. Because your movement, like everything else, is controlled. You don't simply leave the house whenever you want. You go out with purpose. Accompanied, usually. Observed, always. In contrast, if you're working class, late morning doesn't slow down. It accelerates. You might be working outside now. Selling something small. Helping in a shop. Carrying goods. Every task tied directly to survival. The sun rises higher, and with it, the heat settles in. Not gently. But steadily. The kind of heat that doesn't announce itself loudly, but stays long enough to wear you down. You wipe your hands, adjust your clothing, keep moving. Because stopping means falling behind. And falling behind in Rome has consequences that don't wait politely. Back in the upper household, the idea of leaving the house begins to take shape. Not casually. But intentionally. Perhaps a visit to the baths later. Perhaps a religious offering. Perhaps accompanying your husband or preparing for guests. Every outing requires preparation. The palla is arranged. Hair is checked again. Not for vanity, exactly. But for correctness. Because being seen is part of your life. And being seen incorrectly is not an option. When you step outside, the world feels different. Not quieter. But more distant. You don't shout. You don't push through crowds. You move carefully, aware of how you appear, aware of who might be watching. Men pass by without acknowledging you directly. Or sometimes with too much attention, quickly disguised as something else. Other women glance, subtly assessing. Clothing. Posture. Details that reveal more than words ever would. The streets are full, but your presence within them is contained. You are there. But never fully part of it. Meanwhile, for others, the street is everything. Loud, chaotic, unavoidable. A place of work, risk, and constant movement. You navigate it with instinct rather than intention. Avoiding trouble. Finding opportunity where you can. Responding quickly to things that don't go as planned, which is most things. Because the city doesn't slow down for anyone. And it certainly doesn't organize itself around your comfort. As midday approaches, hunger returns. Not dramatically. Just a quiet reminder. In wealthier homes, the main meal is still to come later. So this moment is lighter. A pause rather than a full stop. In poorer homes, you eat when you can. What you can. Standing, sometimes. Sitting, if there's space. Always aware that rest is temporary. Because the second half of the day is already waiting. And it will look a lot like the first. Just a little more tiring. A little warmer. A little closer to evening, when everything finally begins to slow, not because it wants to, but because it has to. And somewhere in all of this, between tasks and expectations, between silence and noise, between control and survival. Your day continues. Not dramatically. Not memorably. But completely. By the time the sun reaches its highest point, the city feels heavier. Not louder, exactly. Just fuller. Heat settles into the stone streets, into the walls, into the fabric of your clothing. It lingers there. Quietly insisting that everything takes a little more effort than it did an hour ago. In wealthier households, this is when the rhythm of the day shifts. Not into rest, but into something slower. More deliberate. You may sit again, this time in a shaded part of the house, where light filters in gently rather than directly. The architecture helps, thick walls keeping some of the heat out, high ceilings letting the air move just enough to be tolerable. A servant might bring you something small. Fruit, perhaps. Or watered wine. You take it without ceremony. Because here, comfort is never announced. It's simply maintained. This part of the day is often quiet. Not silent, but subdued. Work continues around you, but it feels more distant. Softer. Like it's happening just out of reach. If you have children, they are closer now. Not because they've been quiet all morning, but because someone has decided that you should be involved. You speak to them. Correct them gently. Guide them in ways that are less about instruction and more about shaping. A daughter watches you closely. Not just what you say, but how you move, how you respond, how you exist within the boundaries you've been given. Because one day, those same boundaries will belong to her. A son, if he is still young enough, is present but already drifting toward a different world. One that will eventually exclude you in ways that are subtle but absolute. You understand this. You don't comment on it. Because in Rome, many things are simply accepted long before they are fully understood. Elsewhere in the city, there is no quiet midday. Only continuation. If you are working, the heat doesn't pause your responsibilities. It just makes them harder. You wipe sweat from your face, from your neck, from your arms that never seem to stay clean for long. Dust clings to everything. To skin. To fabric. To the inside of your thoughts. If you're selling something, you adjust your voice. Louder when needed. Softer when it helps. You learn quickly how to read people. Who might stop? Who won't? Who pretends not to see you, even when they already have? Every interaction is small, but it matters. Because enough small things become survival. Back in the upper household, the idea of the baths begins to surface. Not urgently. But inevitably. Bathing in Rome is not just about cleanliness. It's routine. It's social. It's one of the few places where the structure of the day loosens slightly, even if it never fully disappears. Preparation begins quietly. Clothing adjusted. Hair checked again, though you know it won't stay perfect for long. You gather what you need. Not much. Just enough. And then, accompanied as expected, you step out once more into the city. The baths are never empty. They are full of movement, voices, echoes that bounce off stone and water in ways that make everything feel larger than it is. You enter, and for a moment, the outside world fades slightly. Not completely. But enough. There are other women here. Some like you. Some not. Different households. Different lives. All intersecting briefly in this shared space. You undress with practiced ease. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's normal. Privacy here is flexible. You learn not to think about it too much. The water is warm. Not perfectly clean, not perfectly anything. But it serves its purpose. You step in slowly, letting the temperature settle around you. And for a moment, just a moment, the weight of the day softens. You're not managing anything. Not overseeing. Not being watched as closely. Just existing. Conversations happen around you. Light, drifting, sometimes sharp underneath. News travels here. Quiet judgments too. Someone mentions a family. Another mentions a marriage. You listen without appearing to. Because information, in Rome, is as valuable as anything else. Time in the bath stretches slightly. Not long enough to forget your responsibilities. But long enough to feel like a pause. Eventually. You leave. Dry off. Redress. Adjust everything back into place. And step outside again, returning to a world that never actually stopped moving. For others, bathing is less certain. Less frequent. Maybe you visit when you can afford it. Maybe not at all. Water, for you, is practical first. Something to carry. To use carefully. To not waste. And so while others soak and talk and momentarily forget themselves, you continue. Working. Moving. Adapting. Because your version of the day doesn't include pauses. Only transitions. As the afternoon begins to lean toward evening, the light changes. Softer. Longer shadows stretching across streets and walls. In wealthier homes, preparations begin for the main meal. This is the center of the day. Not just for nourishment. But for structure. Order. Display. Food is prepared carefully. More variety now. More attention. Servants move with purpose, each task part of something larger that must come together at the right time. You oversee what needs overseeing. Correct what needs correcting. And then, when everything is ready, you take your place. The meal is not rushed. It unfolds. Courses arriving one after another. Conversation weaving between them. If guests are present, the atmosphere shifts slightly. More performance. More awareness. You speak when appropriate. Listen when expected. Everything measured, even if it appears effortless. Meanwhile, in the lower parts of the city, evening brings something else. Not rest. But a different kind of activity. Work doesn't end. It changes. Streets grow louder again. Taverns fill. Voices rise. You may still be working. Selling. Serving. Carrying. Or finally returning home, if there is one to return to. Food is simpler. Quicker. Eaten without ceremony. Because hunger doesn't wait for structure. And neither does exhaustion. As darkness slowly replaces the light, the city shifts once more. Not quieter. Just different. And through it all, your day continues to unfold. Not in moments that stand out. But in a steady, unbroken line from morning to night. Held together by expectation. By necessity. By the quiet understanding that tomorrow will begin the same way. And you will rise to meet it. Whether you want to or not. Night settles over Rome slowly. Not like a curtain dropping, but like a gradual dimming, as if the city itself is deciding, piece by piece, to soften its edges. The heat doesn't disappear. It lingers in the stone, in the walls, in the air that still feels used, like it's been passed from one person to another all day and never fully refreshed. In wealthier homes, the evening meal continues to stretch. Not endlessly, but long enough to feel like the center of the day has finally arrived. You recline, as is the custom. Not completely relaxed, but arranged in a way that suggests ease. Others around you do the same. Voices rise and fall. Stories are told. Some amusing, some unnecessary, some repeated often enough that they've become part of the routine rather than actual conversation. If your husband is present, his presence shapes everything. Not loudly. But completely. You are attentive, but not overly so. Engaged, but not dominant. Careful in the way you respond, the way you speak, the way you exist within the shared space. Because even here, even in your own home, there are expectations that do not loosen. If guests are present, the performance continues. A balance between warmth and restraint. Laughter, when appropriate. Silence, when required. And always, beneath it all, the quiet awareness that you are being observed. Not judged openly. But noted. Compared. Remembered. Eventually, the meal ends. Not abruptly. But with a natural slowing, as if everyone has silently agreed that enough has been said, enough has been eaten, enough has been shown. Servants begin to clear. The room shifts again, returning to something more private. More contained. For a brief moment, there is a sense of completion. The main task of the day is done. But the day itself is not quite finished. Elsewhere in the city, night feels entirely different. The streets are louder now. Not in the structured way of daytime, but in something more unpredictable. Taverns spill light and noise into the darkness. Voices overlap. Arguments begin and end without resolution. Laughter cuts through everything, sometimes genuine, sometimes forced. If you are still working, this is when things become less certain. More chaotic. People are less careful. Less patient. Coins are spent more freely, but judgment is worse. You move through it carefully. Avoiding trouble when you can. Enduring it when you can't. Because night in Rome doesn't belong to anyone. It just happens. Back in the household, the evening slows again. You may withdraw to a quieter space. Sit for a while. Not working, not managing, just present. These moments are rare. And they pass quickly. If you have children, they are quieter now. Tired. Less demanding. You check on them. Adjust a blanket. Say something soft that won't be remembered in words, but will linger in feeling. Because this, more than anything else, is where your role becomes personal. Not public. Not structured. Just human. If your husband calls for you, you go. Not immediately, but without delay. Because some expectations are not spoken. They are simply understood. Marriage in Rome is not always what it appears to be from the outside. It is duty. It is alliance. It is continuity. And somewhere within that, sometimes, there is something softer. Something real. But it is not required. And so it is not guaranteed. You do what is expected. With grace, if possible. With quiet endurance, if not. The night deepens. Oil lamps flicker. Shadows move across walls in ways that make rooms feel larger and smaller at the same time. The house grows quieter. Not silent. Never fully silent. There is always a sound somewhere. A movement. A reminder that life continues, even when it slows. Eventually, you prepare to sleep. Not ceremoniously. Just practically. Clothing adjusted. Hair loosened. Jewelry removed and placed somewhere safe, or at least somewhere you hope is safe. You lie down. The bed feels familiar. Not particularly comfortable. But known. And that, in its own way, is enough. Your body settles before your mind does. Because your mind is still moving. Reviewing the day, not in detail, but in impressions. Things you said. Things you didn't say. Things you noticed. Things you chose to ignore. Because every day in Rome is built on choices like that. Small. Constant. Unavoidable. If you are in the insula, sleep is different. Less controlled. Less predictable. Noise doesn't fade completely. It shifts. Someone nearby is still talking. Someone else is coughing. A baby cries briefly, then stops. The building itself creaks, as if it's adjusting to the weight of everyone inside it. Your bed is simpler. Your space smaller. But the exhaustion is deeper. Because your day has been less contained. More physical. More immediate. You lie down anyway. Because there is no alternative. And slowly, despite everything, sleep begins to take hold. Not gently. But steadily. Pulling you under in small increments. Until the noise becomes distant. The thoughts become softer. And the day finally releases you. For a few hours. Before it begins again. Because tomorrow will not be different. Not really. The same streets. The same expectations. The same quiet balance between what is required and what is possible. You will wake up. You will move. You will manage, endure, maintain. And somewhere within all of that, you will continue. Not as a story. Not as a legend. But as part of something constant, something repetitive, something almost invisible. The everyday life of a Roman woman. Not because you don't sleep, but because it never seems to last long enough to feel separate from the day before it. At some point in the night, you shift. Half awake. Aware of your surroundings without fully engaging with them. A sound in the distance. A movement in the house. The quiet crackle of a lamp burning lower. And then, without ceremony, morning begins again. Not announced. Not invited. Just, present. You wake the same way you did before. Not suddenly. But gradually, as the world returns to you piece by piece. The air feels the same. The room looks the same. Nothing has changed. And yet, everything starts over. If you are young, the repetition feels endless. Not comforting. Not yet. Just, long. You measure time differently. Not in years, but in days that feel nearly identical. You learn quickly what is expected. How to move. How to speak. How to remain within the lines that have already been drawn for you. If you are newly married, your days carry a different weight. Everything feels watched. Not closely, not obviously, but enough. You are learning a new household. New rhythms. New expectations that are similar to what you knew before, but just different enough to require constant attention. You are careful. More careful than you let anyone see. Because mistakes here are not corrected the same way they were in your father's house. They linger longer. They matter more. You wake, you prepare, you step into the day with that awareness sitting quietly behind everything you do. If you are older, the repetition feels familiar. Not easier, but known. You don't think about each task the same way anymore. You move through them with a kind of practiced efficiency. Not rushing. But not hesitating either. You've seen enough days like this to understand their shape. And somewhere in that understanding, there is a small kind of stability. Not comfort, exactly. But predictability. Which, in Rome, is close enough. If you are a mother, your mornings are no longer your own. Not even briefly. Before you fully wake, someone needs something. A child stirs. Another calls out. A small problem appears and must be handled immediately. Because small problems have a way of becoming larger if ignored. You respond automatically. Not because you've been told to. Because it has become part of you. Your role is no longer just to maintain a household. It is to shape lives. Quietly. Constantly. Without pause. You guide without announcing that you are guiding. Correct without making it feel like correction. Teach without calling it teaching. Because this is how things are passed on. Not through instruction alone. But through repetition. Through example. Through being seen, day after day, doing what is expected. If you are poor, motherhood feels different. Less structured. More immediate. There is less space for quiet teaching. More need for quick decisions. Quick corrections. Quick solutions to problems that don't wait politely. You carry a child while doing everything else. Or you leave them briefly, trusting that they will be fine because they have to be. There is no ideal version of this. Only the version that works enough to get through the day. As the morning continues, the city resumes its familiar rhythm. The same sounds. The same movements. The same patterns repeating with only slight variations. And within that, your place remains steady. Defined. Contained. If you are wealthy, your world is smaller than it appears. Your house is large. Your rooms are spacious. But your freedom is measured. You don't go where you want. You go where it is appropriate. Where it is allowed. Where it reflects well on your household. And so your life expands and contracts within those boundaries, never quite pushing against them, but always aware of where they are. If you are poor, your world is larger. But not in a way that feels like freedom. You move through streets, markets, public spaces. You see more. Hear more. Experience more. But you are also exposed to more. Risk. Noise. Uncertainty. Your boundaries are not walls. They are conditions. And they shift constantly. As the day moves forward again, tasks return. Familiar. Unavoidable. If you are in charge of a household, there is always something to manage. Something slightly out of place. Something that needs attention. And you give it. Without question. Because that is what your role demands. If you are working for survival, there is always something to do. Something that must be finished. Something that cannot wait. And you do it. Because not doing it is not an option. The hours pass. Not slowly. Not quickly. Just steadily. Marked by small changes in light, in temperature, in the way the city sounds as it moves from one part of the day to another. And somewhere within all of this, something else begins to take shape. Not in a single moment. But over time. A quiet understanding of your life as a whole. Not just today. But all the days before it. And all the days that will follow. If you are young, you begin to see what lies ahead. Not clearly. But enough. You watch older women. How they move. How they speak. How they carry the weight of years that look very similar to the ones you are just beginning. And you understand, slowly, that this is not temporary. This is not a phase. This is a structure. A pattern that continues. If you are older, you begin to look back. Not dramatically. Not with regret, necessarily. But with awareness. You remember being younger. More uncertain. More aware of every expectation. And now, those expectations are still there. But they feel quieter. Not because they matter less. But because you have learned how to exist within them. How to move through them without thinking about each one individually. And in that, there is a kind of quiet adaptation. Not freedom. But familiarity. The day continues. As it always does. Carrying you with it. Not asking. Not waiting. As the days repeat, something subtle begins to change. Not around you. But within you. At first, you don't notice it. Because nothing feels different enough to stand out. The same routines. The same rooms. The same expectations waiting quietly at the start of every morning. But over time, the repetition begins to settle into something deeper. Not just habit. Something closer to identity. You are no longer learning your role. You are living it. And that shift happens so gradually that you never quite feel it arrive. If you are married, the relationship itself changes too. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just slowly, in the way that anything repeated enough times begins to reshape itself. In the beginning, there may have been a tension. Careful words. Moments that felt deliberate. But over time, much of that softens into routine. You know where he will be. He knows where you will be. There are fewer surprises. More assumptions. Not all of them spoken. You share a life. But not always in the way stories might describe. There is closeness, sometimes. Distance, at other times. And often, something in between. A quiet coexistence built on structure rather than feeling. And yet, within that structure, small moments still exist. A glance. A brief conversation that goes slightly deeper than usual. A shared silence that feels less empty than expected. They are not constant. But they are there. And you notice them when they happen. Even if you don't acknowledge them out loud. If you are a mother, time feels different. Not because it slows. But because it layers. Your children grow, almost without asking permission. One day they need everything. The next, they begin to pull away. Gradually. Naturally. Your role shifts again. From guiding every movement. To watching from a distance. Correcting less. Observing more. Letting them move into their own patterns, even when those patterns don't always match what you expected. If you have daughters, you see yourself reflected. Not exactly. But enough. In the way they move. In the questions they don't ask directly. In the way they begin to understand the limits of their world. You teach them what you can. Not all at once. But in pieces. Through daily life. Through example. Through quiet corrections that seem small but are remembered later. If you have sons, they begin to leave your world in a different way. Not physically, at first. But socially. They are drawn into spaces where you are no longer central. Where your influence becomes less visible. Less immediate. And you accept this. Not because it feels easy. but because it is expected. And expectation, in Rome, is stronger than preference. If you are poor, aging feels different. Less gradual. More immediate. Your body reminds you of time more clearly. Tasks that once felt automatic begin to take more effort. More time. There is no space to slow down. So you don't. You adjust. You find ways to keep going. Because stopping is not an option that has been offered to you. And so your strength becomes quieter. Less visible. But more constant. The city around you continues as it always has. Unchanged in its rhythm. Unaffected by your individual experience. Crowds move. Markets open and close. Voices rise and fall. And through it all, your life unfolds within a structure that remains largely the same. Day after day. Year after year. Sometimes, you think about what lies beyond it. Not in a dramatic way. Not as a plan. Just as a passing thought. A moment where your mind moves slightly outside the boundaries you live within. What would it be like to move freely? To decide your day without expectation shaping it first. To exist without being observed, measured, quietly evaluated. The thought doesn't last long. Not because it isn't meaningful. But because it isn't useful. And usefulness, in your world, determines what stays and what fades. So you return to what is in front of you. The next task. The next conversation. The next small decision that keeps everything moving forward. As evening comes again, familiar and unchanged, the cycle continues. The same preparations. The same routines. The same quiet adjustments that make each day function. But now, with time behind you, everything feels slightly different. Not new. But understood. You know what to expect. You know what matters. You know what can be ignored. And that knowledge shapes your experience more than anything else. You no longer react to every moment. You move through them. Steadily. Without resistance. Without surprise. And somewhere within that steady movement, something settles. Not satisfaction. Not dissatisfaction. Something quieter. A kind of acceptance that doesn't need to be spoken. Because it is present in everything you do. The way you wake. The way you work. The way you rest. The way you continue, even when nothing changes. And as night returns once more, soft and familiar, you prepare again for sleep. Not expecting tomorrow to be different. Not needing it to be. Because in a life built on repetition, difference is not what defines you. Continuity is. And so you lie down. In the same space. In the same position. With the same quiet thoughts that fade as sleep slowly takes hold. And somewhere between waking and rest, between expectation and memory. Your life continues. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But completely. Time, in your life, does not arrive all at once. It doesn't announce itself with a clear dividing line between what was and what is. Instead, it gathers quietly. Day after day. Small moments stacking on top of each other until one morning, without warning, you realize that you are no longer where you once were. Not physically. But within the shape of your life. If you have reached this point, you notice it in simple ways first. Your movements are more deliberate. Not slower, exactly. Just more considered. You no longer rush unless there is a reason. And there are fewer reasons than there used to be. Your place in the household, whatever form it takes, is established now. You are not proving yourself in the same way. You are maintaining something that has already been built. And maintenance, you've learned, is its own kind of work. If you are still married, the relationship has settled into something steady. Not necessarily warm. Not necessarily distant. Just, known. You understand each other's patterns. The way conversations begin and end. The things that are said. The things that are not. There is less effort spent on shaping impressions. More acceptance of what is already there. And within that, a certain quiet rhythm forms. Not exciting. But reliable. If you have lost a husband, which many women do, your life changes again. Not loudly. Not in a way that draws constant attention. But in ways that reshape your position entirely. You may return to your family. Or remain where you are, depending on circumstances. Your independence may increase. Or your limitations may deepen. It depends less on what you want. And more on what is decided around you. You adapt. Because that is what you have always done. If you have children who are now grown, your role shifts once more. You are no longer at the center of daily activity. Not in the same way. You are still present. Still respected, perhaps. But the movement of the household begins to orbit elsewhere. You observe more. Speak less. Not because you have nothing to say. But because you understand when it matters. And when it doesn't. If you have daughters, you watch them step into the life you once entered. You see the same careful movements. The same awareness. The same quiet adjustments to expectations that were never fully explained, only learned. You recognize it immediately. Even if they don't. And sometimes, you offer guidance. Not directly. Not forcefully. Just enough. A comment. A suggestion. Something small that carries more meaning than it appears to. If you have sons, they are now part of a world that continues to move further from yours. Their lives unfold in spaces where you are not present. Where your influence exists more as memory than direction. And you accept that too. Because this, like everything else, follows a pattern that does not need to be questioned to be understood. If you are poor, age brings different challenges. Not new ones. Just more intense. Your body carries the record of your life. In ways that cannot be hidden. Tasks remain. Responsibilities remain. But the effort required increases. There is no moment where you are allowed to step back completely. No clear transition into rest. Only a gradual shift in what you can do, and how you do it. You rely more on others, when they are available. And when they are not, you continue anyway. Because that is what your life has always required. The city does not change for you. It continues at the same pace. The same noise. The same constant motion that never pauses long enough to notice individual lives moving within it. And yet, your experience of it changes. Not because the city is different. But because you are. You move through it with less urgency. More awareness. You notice things you once ignored. Not because they are new. But because you now have the space to see them. The way light falls differently at certain times of day. The patterns of movement in the streets. The repetition in everything around you that mirrors the repetition in your own life. And within that awareness, there is something quiet. Not satisfaction. Not regret. Something more neutral. A recognition. That your life, like the city itself, has been built on continuity. On repetition. On small actions carried out over long periods of time. Not dramatic. Not celebrated. But essential. As evening comes, as it always does, you follow the same patterns. The same preparations. The same slow movement toward rest. But now, there is less tension in it. Less need to prove anything. Less need to shape how things appear. You exist within your life as it is. Not as something you are still trying to define. And when night settles, softer now, more familiar than ever, you prepare for sleep once again. The same space. The same routine. But a different awareness behind it. You lie down, and your thoughts move differently. Less focused on what needs to be done tomorrow. More aware of everything that has already been done. Not counted. Not measured. Just, present. A lifetime of days that looked very much like this one. And as sleep begins to take hold, slowly, steadily, without urgency, there is one final understanding that settles quietly beneath everything else. That your life was not built on extraordinary moments. Not on events that would be recorded or remembered widely. But on something far more constant. Far more human. The quiet, unbroken rhythm of daily existence. The things that were done because they had to be done. The roles that were carried because they were given. The days that passed, one after another, forming something complete without ever needing to stand out on their own. And somewhere within that quiet continuity, you remain. Not as a story told loudly, but as a life lived fully. Even if no one ever writes it down. There are days that feel exactly like every other day. And then there are days that feel exactly like every other day, but carry something slightly different beneath them. Not an event. Not a disruption. Just a shift so small it would be easy to miss if you weren't living inside it. You wake as you always do. The same room. The same air. The same quiet understanding of what the day will require from you. But something feels lighter. Or perhaps heavier. It's difficult to tell. Because nothing has changed in a way you can point to. And yet, you notice yourself pausing for just a moment longer before getting up. Not out of reluctance. Not out of comfort. Just awareness. The kind that comes after years of repetition. When you begin to see the pattern not as something you are inside of, but something you are part of. You move through your morning as you always have. Washing. Dressing. Adjusting yourself into the version of you that the world expects to see. But now, you feel less like you are reacting to it. And more like you are moving with it. Not in control. Never in control. But aligned. In a way that feels almost natural. As the day continues, you begin to notice the smaller things more clearly. Not because they are new. But because you have seen them so many times that they have become familiar enough to truly observe. The way light changes across a wall as the sun moves. The way voices shift in tone depending on the hour. The patterns of footsteps in corridors, in streets, in spaces that never fully empty. All of it repeating. All of it continuing. And within that repetition, something becomes clear. Your life has never been separate from this rhythm. It has always been part of it. Woven into it so completely that separating one from the other would be impossible. You are not just living in Rome. You are part of what makes it function. Quietly. Constantly. Without recognition. Without interruption. As midday arrives again, you move through it without resistance. Tasks are completed. Conversations happen. Decisions are made. All in the same steady, unbroken way. And yet, there is less urgency behind it now. Not because the work has lessened. But because your relationship to it has changed. You no longer question it. You no longer measure yourself against it. You simply do it. Because it is yours to do. Because it always has been. And likely always will be. As the afternoon stretches on, your thoughts drift slightly. Not away from what you are doing. But alongside it. You remember things. Not specific days. Not exact moments. But impressions. Feelings. Fragments of earlier versions of yourself moving through similar spaces with slightly different awareness. You remember learning. Adjusting. Trying to understand expectations that were never fully explained. And you recognize how far you have come within that quiet process. Not in status. Not in freedom. But in understanding. And that understanding brings with it a kind of stillness. Not inactivity, but calm. A sense that you no longer need to search for where you belong within your life. Because you are already there. As evening approaches once more, familiar and unchanged, you follow the same patterns again. The same movements. The same preparations. But now, everything feels settled. Not fixed. Not permanent. Just steady. You no longer anticipate change. You no longer resist repetition. You exist within it. Fully. Completely. And as night falls, soft and predictable, you prepare again for rest. Not as an ending, but as a continuation of the same quiet rhythm that has carried you through every day before this one. You lie down. The same bed. The same space. But a different awareness behind your thoughts. Not focused on tomorrow. Not held by yesterday. Just present. In this moment. In this life. As it is. And as sleep slowly takes you, once again, without urgency, without resistance. The pattern continues. Unbroken. Unremarked. But complete. Time does not just pass in days. It gathers in seasons. Not always sharply defined, not always announced, but present in small shifts that you begin to notice only because everything else stays so consistent. The air changes first. Slightly cooler in the mornings, or heavier, depending on the time of year. Clothing adjusts with it. Layers added or removed without much thought, because the rhythm of adaptation is already part of your life. If it is summer, the heat becomes something you live inside. Not something you escape. The stone holds it. The streets reflect it. Your body learns to move through it more slowly, more carefully, conserving energy in ways that no one ever explains, but everyone understands. Work continues. It always does. Just at a different pace. Voices sound more tired in the afternoon. Movements become more deliberate. Even the city itself feels slightly slower. As if weighed down by the same sun that presses against your shoulders. If it is winter, the change is quieter. Colder mornings. Longer nights. Rooms that feel less welcoming when you first wake, until movement and activity slowly bring warmth back into them. You adjust again. Without resistance. Because resisting change, in a life like yours, has never been particularly useful. Festivals arrive from time to time. Not constantly. But often enough to break the pattern, if only slightly. You notice them first in the atmosphere. A shift in the way people speak. A certain anticipation that moves through the streets, through households, through conversations that carry just a little more energy than usual. If you are in a household, preparations begin. Decorations. Food. Arrangements that are slightly more elaborate than the daily routine requires. There is an effort to mark the day as different. Even if the difference is mostly symbolic. You participate. As expected. Dressing perhaps with a little more attention. Moving through the day with a slightly altered rhythm. There may be gatherings. More people. More voices. More movement within spaces that are usually controlled and quiet. For a moment, the structure loosens. Not completely. But enough to be noticed. Laughter comes more easily. Conversations stretch a little longer. There is a sense, brief but real, that the day does not need to follow its usual shape. If you are outside, working, surviving, the festival feels different. It is louder. More chaotic. More opportunity, perhaps. More risk. Crowds gather. Coins move more freely. People are less careful. And you move within that carefully, balancing what can be gained with what must be avoided. Because even in celebration, the underlying structure of your life does not disappear. It simply shifts slightly, then returns. And it always returns. After the festival passes, the city settles again. Quickly. Almost as if nothing happened. The decorations are removed. The extra noise fades. And the familiar rhythm resumes, unchanged. You return to your routine. Without needing to think about it. Because it has been waiting for you the entire time. There are other changes too. Less predictable. Less welcome. Illness, for example. It arrives without ceremony. A slight discomfort at first. A tiredness that feels deeper than usual. Something that doesn't pass as quickly as it should. If you are able, you continue anyway. Because stopping is not always an option. But the body insists. Gradually. Firmly. And you are forced to slow. Not completely. But enough to notice the difference. If you are in a household, others may take over some tasks. Temporarily. Carefully. But the structure remains. You feel its absence more than its presence when you are not fully part of it. If you are poor, illness is more complicated. Less space to rest. Less ability to step away from what must be done. You continue as long as you can. Because there is no clear moment where you are allowed to stop. And even when you do, the world around you does not adjust to accommodate it. It simply continues. As it always has. As it always will. And eventually, whether quickly or slowly, you recover. Or you adapt. Or you carry the change with you as part of your new normal. Because life, in Rome, is not about returning to what was. It is about continuing with what is. As the days pass, blending into each other once more, the pattern reasserts itself. Morning. Midday. Evening. Night. Repeated. Not identically. But closely enough that the differences feel small compared to the whole. And within that repetition, your awareness deepens further. You no longer measure time in individual days. You feel it as a continuous line. Unbroken. Steady. Carrying you forward whether you mark it or not. You become less focused on what is coming next. Because you already know. Not the details. But the shape. And that is enough. As evening arrives again, familiar and unchanged. You move through it with the same quiet certainty. The same understanding of what is required. The same acceptance of what will follow. And when night comes, soft and predictable, you prepare once more for sleep. Not as an ending. Not as a pause. But as part of the same continuous rhythm that defines everything. You lie down. The same space. The same position. The same quiet transition from awareness to rest. And as sleep takes hold, gently but steadily. The pattern continues. Not broken. Not questioned. Just lived. At some point, without marking the moment, you begin to think less about what you are doing. And more about what it means. Not in a dramatic way. Not as a sudden realization. Just a quiet shift that settles into your thoughts as naturally as everything else has settled into your life. You are still moving. Still working. Still responding to the same expectations that have always shaped your days. But now, there is a second layer beneath it. An awareness that runs alongside everything you do. When you fold a garment, you don't just fold it. You recognize how many times you have done this before. How many times you will do it again. When you give instructions, you don't just speak. You hear the familiarity in your own voice. The practice tone that has formed over years of repetition. When you walk through a room, you don't just pass through it. You feel how known it is to you. Every corner. Every surface. Every small detail that has become part of your memory without ever needing to be remembered deliberately. And within that awareness, a question begins to take shape. Not clearly. Not fully. But present. Is this what a life is? Not a single answer. Not a single path. But a collection of repeated moments, layered so closely together that they become something continuous. You don't resist the thought. But you don't follow it too far either. Because your world has never encouraged that kind of reflection. Not openly. Not deeply. There is always something to do. Something that brings your attention back to the immediate. Back to what is required. And so the question lingers quietly. Unresolved. But not uncomfortable. Just, there. If you are surrounded by others, your awareness extends to them as well. You begin to see their patterns more clearly. The way a servant moves through the same tasks every day. The way a family member repeats certain phrases, certain habits, without realizing it. The way conversations circle back to the same topics, the same concerns, the same small observations about a world that rarely changes in ways that affect your daily life. You notice how everyone is part of something larger. Not by choice. But by structure. And within that structure, everyone is repeating, adjusting, continuing. Just like you. The realization does not isolate you. It connects you. Quietly. Without needing to be spoken. Because this is not something that would be discussed openly. Not because it is forbidden. But because it is unnecessary. Everyone already knows it. In a way. Even if no one says it out loud. As the day continues, your movements remain steady. Your tasks unchanged. But your relationship to them has shifted again. You no longer see them as separate pieces. You see them as part of a continuous whole. A rhythm that carries you from one moment to the next without interruption. And within that rhythm, your identity feels less like something you define. And more like something that exists through what you do. Not in a limiting way. But in a grounded one. You are not separate from your actions. You are shaped by them. Quietly. Constantly. Over time. If you are alone, even briefly, the awareness becomes clearer. Not louder. Just more present. You sit. Or stand. Or pause between tasks for a moment longer than usual. And you feel the stillness beneath everything. Not silence. Not emptiness. Just a space where nothing is required of you for a brief moment. And in that space, you exist without performing a role. Without responding to expectation. Just, existing. It does not last long. It never does. But it is enough to be noticed. And once noticed, it becomes something you recognize when it appears again. A small, quiet moment within a life that is otherwise filled with movement and responsibility. As evening approaches, bringing with it the familiar transition toward rest, your awareness softens again. Not disappearing. Just blending back into the rhythm of the day. You prepare as you always do. Move as you always have. Respond as expected. But now, there is less tension in it. Less resistance. Because you understand the pattern more completely. Not as something imposed on you. But as something you are part of. And as night settles once more, gentle and unremarkable, you follow the same path toward sleep. The same routine. The same quiet release from the day's demands. But with a different sense beneath it. Not of ending. Not of escape. But of continuation. Because sleep is not separate from your life. It is part of the same rhythm. The same unbroken line that carries you from one moment to the next. And as you lie down, letting the weight of the day settle and fade, your thoughts drift one final time. Not toward tomorrow. Not toward the past. But toward the simple awareness of being here. In this life. As it is. Repeated. Familiar. Complete in its own quiet way. And as sleep finally takes you, slowly, gently, without interruption. The rhythm continues. Unseen. Unspoken. but always present. There is a point, though it never arrives all at once, when you stop expecting anything to change. Not because change is impossible, but because it is no longer something you measure your life against. You wake, as you always have. You move, as you always do. And somewhere within that steady repetition, the idea of different begins to lose its importance. Not completely, but enough. You no longer look ahead wondering how things might be altered. You no longer look back wishing they had been. You remain where you are. Not stuck. Not trapped. Just present. In a way that feels more complete than before. The routines that once felt imposed now feel familiar. Not lighter, but easier to carry. Because you are no longer holding them at a distance. You are within them. Part of them. And that subtle shift changes everything without changing anything at all. When you walk through your home, or your street, or any space that has been part of your life for years, you no longer see it as something external. It feels known in a deeper way. Not just remembered, but understood. You know how the light moves across the walls without needing to look. You know which sounds belong, and which ones signal something unusual. You know the rhythm of voices, of footsteps, of activity rising and falling with the hours. And in that knowing, there is a quiet sense of stability. Not certainty, but familiarity. Which, over time, becomes something just as grounding. If you speak, your words are fewer now. Not because you have less to say, but because you understand more clearly what needs to be said. And what does not. You do not fill silence unnecessarily. You let it exist. Because silence, you've learned, is not empty. It carries its own meaning. Its own presence. And often, it says more than words could. If you listen, you hear more. Not just the words others speak, but the spaces between them. The hesitations. The repetitions. The things that are said often enough to feel automatic. And the things that are avoided entirely. You recognize patterns not just in actions, but in people. And in recognizing them, you understand something simple but lasting. That everyone, in their own way, is moving through a life shaped by repetition. By expectation. By the quiet structure of days that build into something larger without ever announcing themselves. You are not alone in this. You never were. As the day continues, the same as all the others and yet experienced differently, your awareness settles into something steady. Not questioning. Not searching. Just observing. Participating. Existing. Fully within the rhythm that has always carried you. Tasks still come. They always will. Responsibilities do not disappear. They remain, steady and consistent, forming the framework of your day. But they no longer feel separate from you. They are not interruptions. They are not burdens to be measured. They are simply part of what your life is made of. And in accepting that, something quiet shifts again. Not outwardly. Not in a way anyone else would notice. But within you. A sense that your life does not need to be extraordinary to be complete. That meaning does not arrive through grand events or dramatic changes. But through continuity. Through presence. Through the steady movement from one moment to the next. As evening returns once more, soft and predictable, you move through it with the same calm understanding. Nothing surprises you. Nothing needs to. You prepare. You respond. You exist within the familiar pattern. And when night comes, as it always does, you follow the same path toward rest. The same quiet transition. The same release into stillness. You lie down, aware but not thinking. Present but not focused. And in that space, just before sleep takes hold, there is one final layer of understanding. Not formed in words. Not something you would explain. Just something you feel. That your life, in all its repetition, all its quiet structure, all its unremarkable days, has been whole. Not because it stood out. Not because it was seen. But because it was lived. Fully. Continuously. Without needing to be anything else. And as sleep finally settles in, gently, steadily, without interruption, the rhythm does not end. It does not pause. It simply continues. Carrying everything forward. Unseen. Unspoken. But always there. There is no clear ending to a life like this. No single moment where everything pauses and announces that something has been completed. Instead, it continues. As it always has. As it always will, for as long as it is allowed to. Days follow days. Morning returns. Light moves across the same walls. Sounds gather and fade in the same patterns. And you move within it, not as someone waiting for something to happen, but as someone who understands that this is what is happening. At times, you may try to remember a specific day. Not yesterday. Not last week. But something further back. A moment that felt different. You search for it quietly, without urgency. And what you find is not a single clear memory, but a collection of impressions. Fragments. Feelings. A sense of being younger, less certain, more aware of each expectation as it appeared. Less familiar with the rhythm. More conscious of every step within it. And then, without noticing exactly when it happened, that awareness softened. Not disappeared. Just changed. You no longer needed to think about every part of your life. Because your life had already shaped itself around you. Or perhaps you had shaped yourself around it. The difference no longer matters. As you move through another day, you notice how little needs to be decided. Not because nothing is happening, but because so much has already been decided. Long ago. Before you woke. Before you began. Before you even understood what your role would be. And yet, within that structure, you still move. You still choose small things. The way you speak. The way you respond. The way you carry yourself through moments that repeat but are never completely identical. And those small choices. They matter more than they appear. Because they are the only places where your life shifts, even slightly. Not in direction. But in texture. In feeling. In the quiet way one day becomes just a little different from the next, even when everything looks the same. As the hours pass, your awareness drifts again. Not away from your life. But deeper into it. You notice how everything is connected. Not in a grand way. Not as a revelation. Just in the simple understanding that nothing you do stands alone. Each action leads to another. Each moment carries into the next. Forming a continuous line that never truly breaks. Even sleep does not interrupt it. It only softens it. Carries it quietly forward until morning returns again. If you are surrounded by others, you see this continuity in them as well. The same patterns. The same repetitions. Different roles. Different positions. But the same underlying rhythm. Everyone waking. Moving. Working. Resting. Continuing. You begin to understand that this rhythm is larger than any one person. Larger than any one life. It existed before you. It will continue after you. And your place within it, while important to you, is part of something much broader. Not in a way that diminishes you, but in a way that places you gently within a larger flow. As evening approaches again, bringing with it the familiar slowing of the day, you move through your tasks with the same steady presence. There is no urgency to finish. No need to rush toward rest. Because rest will come. It always does. Just as morning always returns. And when night settles once more, quiet and expected, you prepare again for sleep. The same movements. The same space. The same quiet transition from doing to simply being. You lie down. And for a moment, just before sleep takes you, your thoughts drift one last time. Not toward anything specific. Not toward a question or a memory. Just toward a feeling. A quiet recognition. That your life, in all its repetition, all its sameness, all its quiet continuity, has never been empty. It has been full. Not of events. Not of stories that demand to be told. But of moments. Countless moments. Each one small. Each one passing. Each one part of something that, taken together, forms a complete and continuous whole. And still, even within all this repetition, there are moments that almost feel like pauses. Not true pauses. Nothing ever fully stops. But brief spaces where the rhythm softens just enough for you to notice it. You might be standing in a doorway. Not entering. Not leaving. Just there. For a second longer than necessary. The light falls across the floor in a way you've seen countless times before. And yet, in that moment, it feels slightly different. Not brighter. Not softer. Just, noticed. Or you may be sitting, hands resting for a brief moment between tasks. Not because there is nothing to do. But because there is a natural gap. A space where one action has ended and the next has not yet begun. And in that space, you feel something subtle. Not relief. Not exhaustion. Something quieter. A kind of stillness that exists underneath everything else. It doesn't last. It never does. Because the next moment always arrives. The next task. The next voice calling your attention back. And yet, those small spaces remain. Scattered throughout your life. Unremarkable. Easy to forget. But always there. If you begin to notice them more often, they start to feel familiar. Not predictable. But recognizable. You understand that they are part of the rhythm too. Not separate from it. Not interruptions. Just another layer. A quieter one. As the day continues, you carry that awareness with you. Not actively. Not as a thought you return to again and again. But as something that exists in the background. A steady presence beneath everything you do. And it changes nothing. Your tasks remain. Your responsibilities remain. The structure of your life remains exactly as it has always been. But your experience of it feels slightly different. Not heavier. Not lighter. Just, clearer. You move with less resistance. Less questioning. Not because you have given up on anything. But because you understand the nature of what surrounds you more fully. As the hours pass. The city continues its endless motion. Voices rise. Footsteps echo. Doors open and close. Everything repeating. Everything continuing. And you are within it. Not observing from a distance. Not standing apart. But part of it. Completely. As evening approaches once more, you follow the same familiar path. Preparing. Adjusting. Responding. Not thinking about it. Not needing to. Because it has become part of you. And when night comes, as it always does, you move toward rest again. Not seeking it. Not anticipating it. Just arriving at it. Naturally. You lie down. The same space. The same position. The same quiet transition. And once again, just before sleep takes hold, there is that brief moment. That small space where everything is still. Where nothing is required. Where you are simply present. Not as a role. Not as a position within a household or a city. Just as yourself. Unobserved. Unmeasured. unstructured. It passes quickly. It always does. But it is enough. And as sleep finally takes you, gently, steadily, without interruption, the rhythm continues, carrying everything forward, without needing to change, without needing to end, just continuing, as it always has, as it always will. And even as everything continues, unchanged and steady, there is a quiet understanding that settles deeper over time. Not something you arrive at, not something you decide, but something that forms on its own, slowly, as the days repeat and layer over one another. You begin to see that nothing in your life has ever stood alone. No single moment. No single task. No single day. Everything has always been connected. Each action leading quietly into the next, forming a continuous thread that never breaks, only extends. When you wake, you are already within that thread. When you move, you carry it forward. When you rest, it does not end. It simply softens, waiting to resume again. And within that continuity, your life takes its shape. Not sharply defined. Not marked by clear edges. But formed through repetition. Through presence. Through the steady act of continuing. If you look closely, though you rarely have reason to, you might notice how little is truly separate. The way your morning becomes your afternoon without a clear boundary. The way your evening fades into night without a moment of decision. The way one day becomes another without ever fully ending. It is all part of the same motion. The same quiet unfolding that carries everything forward. And within that motion, you remain. Not fixed. Not unchanged. But constant in your presence within it. You do not step outside your life to examine it. You do not pause it to understand it. You live it. Fully. Continuously. Without interruption. As the hours pass again, familiar and unremarkable, you move through them with the same steady awareness. Nothing demands your attention more than anything else. Everything holds its place within the pattern. Everything matters just enough to be done. Nothing demands to stand out. And that, in its own way, becomes a kind of balance. Not perfect. Not effortless. But stable. As evening returns, as it always does, you follow the same quiet path toward rest. Not because you are seeking an end. But because this is where the rhythm naturally leads. You prepare. You adjust. You let the day settle behind you without needing to hold on to it. Because holding on to it serves no purpose. It will return again in a different form tomorrow. And when night settles fully, soft and complete, you lie down once more. The same space. The same stillness. The same quiet release from movement into rest. And once again, there is that moment. That brief, almost unnoticeable space between being awake and being asleep. Where everything is still. Where nothing is required. Where you are simply present. And in that presence, without words, without thought, there is an understanding. That your life has never needed to be more than this. Not more dramatic. Not more visible. But formed through repetition. Through presence. Through the steady act of continuing. If you look closely, though you rarely have reason to, you might notice how little is truly separate. The way your morning becomes your afternoon without a clear boundary. The way your evening fades into night without a moment of decision. The way one day becomes another without ever fully ending. It is all part of the same motion. The same quiet unfolding that carries everything forward. And within that motion, you remain. Not fixed. Not unchanged. But constant in your presence within it. You do not step outside your life to examine it. You do not pause it to understand it. You live it. Fully. Continuously. Without interruption. As the hours pass again, familiar and unremarkable, you move through them with the same steady awareness. Nothing demands your attention more than anything else. Everything holds its place within the pattern. Everything matters just enough to be done. Nothing demands to stand out. And that, in its own way, becomes a kind of balance. Not perfect. Not effortless. But stable. As evening returns, as it always does, you follow the same quiet path toward rest. Not because you are seeking an end. But because this is where the rhythm naturally leads. You prepare. You adjust. You let the day settle behind you without needing to hold on to it. Because holding on to it serves no purpose. It will return again in a different form tomorrow. And when night settles fully, soft and complete, you lie down once more. The same space. The same stillness. The same quiet release from movement into rest. And once again, there is that moment. That brief, almost unnoticeable space between being awake and being asleep. Where everything is still. Where nothing is required. Where you are simply present. And in that presence, without words, without thought, there is an understanding. That your life has never needed to be more than this. Not more dramatic. Not more visible. Not more remembered. Just, lived. Day by day. Moment by moment. Within a rhythm that has always been enough. And as sleep finally takes you again, gently, steadily, without resistance. The thread continues. Unbroken. Unending. Carrying everything forward into another morning that will arrive quietly, just as it always does. And so the rhythm carries on, not asking for your attention, not demanding to be understood, simply continuing as it always has. There is a quiet certainty in that. Not comforting in an obvious way. Not reassuring in the way words might try to be. But steady. Reliable. The kind of steadiness that does not need to explain itself. You no longer look for meaning in individual moments. Not because they lack it. But because you understand that meaning, if it exists at all, is not held in a single action, or a single day. It is spread out. Across everything. Across repetition. Across the quiet accumulation of moments that, taken together, form something whole without ever needing to stand apart. When you move through your day now, there is less distinction between what matters and what does not. Everything holds its place. Everything contributes, even if it feels small, even if it feels unnoticed. And perhaps that is what has changed most. Not your life. Not your surroundings. But your awareness of how it all fits together. You are no longer searching for something beyond it. You are within it. Completely. And that completeness does not arrive with a feeling. It does not announce itself. It simply exists. As the day unfolds again, as it always does, you follow its path without resistance. There is no need to anticipate what comes next. You already know. Not the details. But the shape. And the shape is enough. Morning becomes midday. Midday becomes evening. Evening becomes night. Each part flowing into the next without interruption, without decision. And within that flow, you remain steady. Present. Unmoved by the need for change. Because change is no longer the measure of your experience. Instead, you notice continuity. The way everything holds together. The way nothing truly begins or ends, but simply transitions. And that understanding settles deeper with each passing day. Not growing louder. Just becoming more familiar. As evening returns once more, bringing with it the same quiet slowing, you move through your final tasks without urgency. There is no rush toward rest. No sense of finishing. Only the natural progression toward stillness. And when night arrives, as it always does, you prepare again for sleep. The same movements. The same quiet gestures that signal the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. You lie down. The same space. The same stillness surrounding you. And once again, there is that moment. That small, almost imperceptible space where everything pauses. Where you are not doing. Not responding. Not moving within the structure of your life. Just existing. It is not dramatic. It is not profound in the way stories might describe. But it is real. And it is enough. And as sleep begins to take you, slowly, gently, without resistance. There is nothing more to add. Nothing more to seek. Nothing more to complete. Because everything is already continuing. Already unfolding. Already carrying you forward within a rhythm that does not need to change in order to be whole. And so it goes on. Quietly. Steadily. Without interruption. Without conclusion. Just as it always has. Just as it always will. And even as everything continues without conclusion, there is a sense that nothing has been left unfinished. Not because every task is complete. Not because every moment has been resolved. But because completion, in a life like yours, was never about reaching an end. It was about continuing. About carrying each day forward into the next without breaking the quiet thread that holds everything together. But allowing them to happen, naturally, without interruption. And when night settles once more, bringing with it the same quiet stillness, you follow it without hesitation. You lie down. The same space. The same gentle transition from movement to rest. And once again, there is that moment. That quiet space where everything is still. Where nothing is required. Where you exist without role, without expectation, without structure. Just, present. And in that presence, there is nothing missing. Nothing unfinished. Nothing waiting to be completed. Because everything is already part of something that continues. Something that does not need to end in order to be whole. And as sleep takes you once more, slowly, gently, without resistance. The rhythm carries on. Not stopping. Not fading. And in that quiet continuation, something becomes almost invisible. Not because it disappears. But because it has always been there. So constant, so steady, that it no longer stands apart from anything else. It is simply part of everything. The rhythm. The repetition. The gentle unfolding of moments that never demand attention, yet never stop arriving. You no longer think of your life as something you are moving through. It feels more like something you are within. Not at the center. Not at the edge. Just, inside it. Where everything flows around you and through you at the same time. The walls of your home. The streets beyond them. The voices, the footsteps, the shifting light across familiar surfaces. All of it continues, whether you notice it or not. And more often now, you don't need to notice it. Because you already understand it. Not in words. Not in explanations. But in the quiet way your body moves without hesitation. The way your hands complete tasks without pause. The way your thoughts no longer question what comes next. Everything is already known. Not in detail. But in pattern. And the pattern is enough. As another day passes into evening, as it always does. There is no need to mark the transition. No need to reflect on what has happened. No need to prepare for what will come. It all happens. Naturally. Continuously. Without interruption. You move through it with the same steady presence. Not adding anything. Not taking anything away. Just participating in what is already there. And when night returns once more, soft and familiar, you follow the same quiet path toward rest. Not because you are ending the day. But because this is where the rhythm leads. You lie down. The same space. The same stillness. And again, that moment appears. That small space between doing and not doing. Between awareness and sleep. Where everything pauses, just enough to be felt. And in that pause, there is no need for thought. No need for meaning. No need for anything beyond what is already present. Because what is present is complete. Not in the sense of being finished, but in the sense of being whole. Nothing missing. Nothing separate. Nothing waiting to be added. And as sleep takes you once more, gently, steadily, without resistance. There is no conclusion. No final moment. No closing. Only continuation. The same quiet rhythm moving forward. Unbroken. Unending. Carrying everything with it, just as it always has. And so, even without endings, there is a sense of something settled. Not concluded. Not finished. But, at rest within itself. You no longer wait for anything to arrive. Not a change. Not a moment. Not a feeling that will make everything clearer. Clarity, you've come to understand, does not arrive from outside. It forms quietly, from within the repetition itself. From seeing the same patterns so many times that they no longer feel separate. They become familiar. And in that familiarity, there is a kind of quiet understanding. Not something you explain. Not something you hold on to. Just something that is there, steady and present. When you wake now, it feels less like the beginning of something new. And more like the continuation of something already in motion. You do not step into the day. You are already within it. Carried forward from everything that came before. Connected to everything that will follow. And so you rise. Not to begin again. But to continue. The same movements. The same quiet transitions from rest into activity. But without the sense that anything needs to change for the day to be complete. Because completeness is no longer something you are trying to reach. It is something that exists within the flow itself. As the hours pass, they no longer feel separate. Morning blends into midday. Midday into evening. Not marked by sharp edges. But by soft transitions that happen without needing to be noticed. And within those transitions, your presence remains steady. Not shifting. Not searching. Just, there. You move through tasks without resistance. Not because they are easy. But because they are known. They belong to the rhythm. And so do you. The world around you continues in the same way. Voices rising and fading. Footsteps repeating across the same paths. Light shifting across the same surfaces. Everything in motion. Everything part of the same continuous unfolding. And you no longer feel the need to separate yourself from it. You are not outside it. You are not observing it. You are part of it. Completely. As evening comes again, quiet and familiar, there is no sense of ending. Only a soft slowing. A natural movement toward stillness. And you follow it, not consciously, but naturally. As you always have. You prepare. You settle. You let the day fade without needing to hold on to any part of it. Because nothing is lost. Everything continues. And when night arrives, as it always does, you lie down once more. The same space. The same quiet stillness surrounding you. And again, there is that moment. That brief pause where everything is simply present. No past. No future. No expectation. Just this. And in that moment, there is nothing missing. Nothing incomplete. Nothing waiting. Because everything is already part of something that does not need to end in order to be whole. And as sleep takes you once more, gently, steadily, without interruption. There is no final thought. No conclusion. No closing. Only the quiet continuation of a life that has never needed to be anything more than what it already is. And as everything continues, without beginning and without end, there is a quiet sense that nothing has ever truly been separate. Not the days. Not the moments. Not even you. Everything exists within the same gentle continuity. A flow that does not pause to define itself. That does not stop to explain where one thing finishes and another begins. It simply carries on. And you are carried with it. Not as something distinct. Not as something apart. But as something that belongs within it completely. You no longer look for edges in your life. No clear starts. No clear endings. Only transitions. Soft, gradual, almost unnoticeable. Morning into midday. Midday into evening. Evening into night. And then again. Without interruption. Without question. Without the need to mark any of it as more important than the rest. Because it is all the same continuous movement. And within that movement, your presence remains steady. Not fixed. Not unchanging. But constant in its quiet participation. You do what is needed. You respond when required. You move when it is time to move. You rest when it is time to rest. And none of it feels separate anymore. None of it feels like something you must think about. It simply happens. And you are part of it as it happens. The world around you continues in the same way. Unaware of itself. Unconcerned with being understood. It moves. It repeats. It unfolds in the same steady rhythm that has always been there. And you no longer try to stand outside of it. You no longer try to define it. You simply exist within it. As it exists around you. As evening comes again, softly, without announcement. You move through it as you always have. Not marking the time. Not measuring the day. Just allowing the natural slowing to take place. The same quiet preparation. The same gentle transition toward stillness. And when night settles once more, wrapping everything in the same familiar calm, you follow it without hesitation. You lie down. The same space. The same quiet. The same moment between awareness and rest. And once again, there is that pause. That small, almost invisible space where nothing is required. Where everything simply is. And in that space, there is no need to understand anything. No need to reflect. No need to hold on to a single thought. Because everything is already part of something that continues without needing to be named. Without needing to be remembered. Without needing to end. And as sleep takes you again, gently, steadily, without resistance. There is no final moment. No last word. No conclusion waiting to be reached. Only the quiet, endless continuation of a life that has always moved forward in the same steady rhythm.